Hey everyone, this is Tracy Friedlander. You're listening to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. On the show today, I have pianist Barron Ryan. Barron is a solo performing artist who is making classical cool, essentially creating his own genre. On the show, we talk about building a buzz around your art. How do you do it? How do you set yourself apart? How do you stand out? This is what we dive into today with Barron Ryan. Let's get started. Hey, Barron, welcome to Crushing Classical.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So great to have you here. So tell me a little bit about your career. I love having people on this show who are classical musicians, but have a unique path, a unique thing that they've created all their own. It's nothing, you can't compare, I don't think, your career to any other pianist.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what you do.
Well, I say that I make music in which classic meets cool because I wanted, as an artist, to pursue whatever form of wonder and beauty that I thought was worth pursuing. And I didn't want to be confined to any particular category. And so I am most strongly schooled and educated in the classical genre, but I also have played jazz. I am a drummer as well. Not so much professionally anymore, but I grew up playing drums a lot. And so I played drums on jazz, and I've listened to pop and soul and funk. And so I wanted to be able to combine those in whatever ways that I thought was interesting. And so I created my own category, classic meets cool.
I love that. You know, Shauna Tucker introduced me to you,
Mm-hmm.
and she's someone else who's been on the podcast. And I think in the title, it talks about creating your own genre because that's what she did
Mm-hmm.
in her type of music. She calls it, oh, now I'm going to forget what she calls it.
The
Chamber
word
soul.
chambers there.
Chamber soul. Yeah. And so why not create your own genre? Like, really, I mean, did you set out to go, I'm going to create my own genre, or did you just start playing and combining and composing and then say, yeah, this is not this thing and it's not that thing, I need to come up with like a new name for it?
I set out believing that I needed to fit into a genre or a category. And I thought that there were three available for me as a featured pianist. I thought there's classical, there's jazz, and there's crossover. And those are the only three that I could choose from. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm going to be classical because that's what I studied in college. And then I applied to fancy graduate schools and I didn't get into them. And so that was when I realized, well, something's not going to work here. But I didn't know what was going to work. And so I'm not sure that you know this, but I started making satirical hip hop at the time.
No, you didn't tell me that. So what is satirical hip-hop?
So I grew up listening to Ludacris and Jay-Z and Kanye West and all the hip hop on the radio. But the older that I got, I thought, these guys aren't really espousing values that I think a mature adults should be propagating in the public eye, talking about how amazing they were as rappers, how many women they could attract, and what they drink in the club and so forth. I thought,
Yeah,
okay, that's all fine, but why are you telling me this? So
right.
I started making songs that made fun of the popular hip hop theme. So I made a song called "Not That Bad," in which I rap about how mediocre I am as a rapper. I made a song, and I made a song called "Ice Water." Instead of drinking gin and juice or Cavassier in the club, I drink ice water. It's because it's good for your health and it's free. And there are just hordes of women who have surrounded me at the end. And I was making this not having any concept of what it was going to be in the future. I just didn't know what sort of music I had to offer professionally. So I thought, I'm going to get my creative energy out in a way that I think is fun and just see what happens. And a marketing friend told me, if you want people to be interested in the product that you produce, then explain the process that went into it. And so I started doing that, and people were starting to pay attention. Some people didn't know what I was doing with my life, but admittedly, I didn't either. So I I learned how to engage an audience with a story using a product that almost nobody goes searching for. And then I competed in a competition for classical pianists that was open only to residents of Oklahoma over the age of 21. So it's a much smaller pool than everyone trying to get into Juilliard and Eastman. And I
Hmm.
won it. And the prize was going to Israel to perform a concert tour. And
Wow.
having just been rejected with the Mozart and Chopin and Beethoven that I had applied to graduate schools with, but having the knowledge that I could create a story to connect an audience with any sort of music that I wanted to make, that's when I realized I don't have to fit into a category. I can make my own. So it was only after having that rejection and then discovery was I able to realize the triumph of taking my strengths as a musician and packaging them in a way that an audience would connect with.
I love that so much. Oh my gosh. I was having a conversation with somebody today about or yesterday about failure and how musicians really shy away from failure. We're just taught that it has to be perfect and it has to be, and if it's not perfect or it's not exactly this thing, then it's no good. And
Mm-hmm.
so did you come to that realization on your just all on your own, or did you have a teacher that was like, "Hey, Barron, maybe it's not all that bad." Like, how were you able to, I mean, I think it's unusual. I'm including myself in this kind of category of people who like, if I'm not chosen, because that's how I felt after all those auditions. If I'm not chosen, I failed.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's nothing else to do except try the same thing again. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
it's what you did was you went to the drawing board and said, like, I just got rejected by all these schools for this thing, but what if I do this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, oh, I should just pick different schools and try again with the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So how
Well,
did you get there?
that was an option too. I was considering going to a less prestigious graduate school, and
Mm-hmm.
I had agreed to it, but the timing didn't work out, and my commitment level at that school was going to be too high for the other obligations that I had
Mm.
professionally, because I was performing with my father, who's also a pianist, and we had just enough concerts where I couldn't go to school full time and do a fellowship. And so I was considering that, but then it just didn't work out, and then I didn't need it to later. I didn't have a particular mentor at the time. My father's always been a mentor, and he was
Mm-hmm.
supportive of me. But I looked at what his career was and planned for something different than what he did. So he wasn't. It's not like he could show me the way exactly in the way I was trying to go. Uh, it was more I would see artists that I appreciated. Yo-Yo Ma's one of them. Bela Fleck, Chris Thiele, Edgar Meyer. These sort of chameleon, and now
Mm-hmm.
Jacob Collier. Although I wasn't aware of him at the time. But these artists who are excellent at whatever they do, and they decide to do any number of different things. And
Yeah.
I knew that those are the musicians that I like the most. My problem was I don't know how to get there. And
Mm-hmm.
so I just had to. I learned a lot of lessons from entrepreneurship. I have business owner friends that I would look at, and there was a meeting here in Tulsa where I live called 1 Million Cups, and it's also in many other cities across the country and across the world. And small businesses would come and talk about their product and or their service and how they were trying to scale. And so I've gotten a lot of energy from that circle of people. And the failure mindset is much more prevalent, I think, in entrepreneurship circles,
Mm-hmm.
and I was drawn to that.
That's amazing. I think that's the other big mistake musicians make is staying with musicians only. I mean, not
Mm-hmm.
broadening how you think because of you're with a bunch of people who pretty much think the same. I did
Mm-hmm.
that too. Like what a gift to have a community of people who think completely differently about business, about career paths. So it sounds like that really shaped your direction.
Yes, and continues to. I was one of the organizers for this entrepreneurship meeting, and another one of the organizers is now my marketing advisor. He helps me with strategy, and he actually gives me input on some ideas of projects to do. We're thinking about a new project, which is very recent, which but
Yeah.
it was his idea. Him knowing me well enough and him also enjoying music, um, it has continued to make a huge difference. And our different spheres of knowledge can come together. He was talking to me about this experiment we were doing, running YouTube ads, and he said it's difficult because you don't have an action, the exact product that you're trying to sell or an exact service that you're trying to sell. You're more so trying to get people involved in the experience of what you're doing on a long-term basis. And I said, yeah, I know. I've been dealing with this for the last 12 years. You don't have to tell me this, but he had to, coming from his background where he's trying to sell a particular product, he has to adjust, and then I have to adjust for, okay, what is it that people are actually getting out of what I'm doing? It's not a CD exactly, but it's not just anything that I'm thinking either. It's not just, hey, this is what I'm doing, and so you should care about it. It's so we have to come at the problem from two different ends, and it helps us both to have each other.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think if you think about promoting something, it has to be something, right? Or is it a whole package that you're promoting and you're trying to, I think we talked about this on our pre-recorded talk about getting fans that are super dedicated, that you can
Mm-hmm.
rely, I mean, people who are, you can rely on them to spend money with you, so that
Mm-hmm.
you're creating yourself recurring income so you can support yourself as a just a human who needs to pay for life, but also as an artist, so that you can continue to create. And the Amanda Palmer thing, where you're creating true fans, like people, people you're connected with, people who will go to the ends of the earth for you. And then that whole concept about, I think it's 1,000 true fans, where if you have this group of people who just are your favorite, then you have a chance at being a creator for them, creating something for them that they really, they want. They're there with you, they've been through. So how do you go about beginning the process of building a following like that?
Just as you were talking, I realized how I would explain it is that you're not selling a product, you're not selling a service, you're not selling yourself either. You
Mhm.
are selling the adventure that you're going on, because as artists, we are all going off into the unknown, and we are discovering beauty in a way that has never been discovered before or presented, or at least we're not aware of it. And then we bring it back and present it to everyone. We say, look, this is what I found. And that journey is what you're selling. Whatever you can present to tell the story, as cliched as that sounds, which is why I used adventure and not story, to tell that story of your adventure, that is what your 1,000 fans will be attracted to. And so that's what I discovered through that satirical hip hop process. And now, only now, as I'm vocalizing it, have I really verbalized it. I've never put it in those terms before, but it's the adventure that you're on as an artist that you're selling.
That's so interesting. So you start with essentially, but the adventure. Okay, what if how do you get someone enrolled in going on the adventure with you if you haven't created an adventure yet?
That's part of it. You
Okay.
have to the you may not always know where you're going. You just start talking about, well, this is where um,
This
you
is where
you
I'm
don't have
going.
a roadmap. You don't have, when you're going to find treasure. If you had a map, then it would have already been taken. It would have. So
Right.
part of what you're doing is talking about the process of leaving, of the journey to get wherever you're going, to the unknown. And so what I
Mhm.
did is, I just talked about, okay, this is how I'm putting this music together at the beginning, and I still do this to some degree, although it's really easy for me to get too nerdy for my audience, and they start to they think I don't know what a major whatever chord I don't know what a tritone substitution is, so and I
Right.
start to anyway, so I have to be careful about that. But if I talk about, well, this is what I'm trying to do. So for instance, I'll take a more recent example. If I'm writing music that I am taking inspiration from another genre for, then I'll say, for my most recent album, which I know we'll get to later, I made a playlist of 16 tracks that have two examples for every track that I have on my album. So I have 8 tracks on my album. There are 16 tracks in this playlist. And I say, this is the inspiration that I used for these different tracks. And so the first track I use Whitney Houston, and it's the song called Eye to Eye from a Goofy Movie, which is a fantastic song. And those are the two influences, whether I was thinking of them or not exactly. They may have just been things that I heard, like the Whitney Houston song I wasn't thinking of exactly, but I had heard it in the past, and it informed this decision to write the song the way that I did, the piano solo the way that I did. And so things like that, to say, this is my thought process, and not necessarily this is where I'm going, because you don't necessarily know where you're going, but talking about your thought process, and you learn how to do it the more that you do it, and your audience appreciates the progression. If the earlier that they start with you, then they can feel like, they're along for the ride, because they realize that you're doing things better as you learn how to do them better.
That's so amazing. I love that story because it just seems like just when you're explaining that, I'm thinking I need to go listen to that Whitney Houston song.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
I want to hear it, like I think that's unusual too, that someone would share their influences. A lot of times you hear, in an interview, someone says, well, what artists have influenced your music? And then they tell you in that moment. But if you get the album, maybe you don't get that information in the show notes or in the album notes or whatever. And it's just left to, sometimes you don't even notice it. So
yeah, well, I to be honest, I didn't put that information in the album because not that I wouldn't have, but I just didn't think of doing it. I had
so you're saying you just shared that, on social media or something?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would do it, and maybe when I reprint the album I will, but I didn't think about doing it. And I also had a limited space in the album too, anyway, so.
Right, but that's cool. That's cool that you share your process and things that have influenced you, because then it makes you kind of want to say, well, I want to know what that combination of influence sounds like coming through on a solo piano piece.
Yes.
So that's cool. And it reminds me, like, one of the things I thought of, I've mentioned this so many times on this podcast, on other episodes too, when Esperanza Spalding did her album and she took everybody on the journey. It was an album a while ago. I don't remember the name, but she took everybody on the journey of watching on Facebook Live the rehearsals, and because the whole album was going to be improvised, but they rehearsed and pre-planned how it was going to go over the course of 3 days, I think. Or maybe that's what they were doing, is it was sort of rehearsing and preparing, and I don't know exactly how she did it, but essentially what she created was something that was never going to exist again. Like she made 7,000 copies of this album. That was your last chance to buy it. You could watch the process. You could pre-purchase it. But you didn't really know what was going to end up on that album. Maybe some of the snippets would be from those lives. Maybe some other parts of it were from off camera, whatever. And then that was the product. It was available one time only, and you had to buy it before it was done. And that was it.
Yeah.
And I think it's so cool because it builds in so many marketing pieces, like the scarcity piece is always something that, kind of, and scarcity, and also like it's extra special because you can never get it again. So it's kind of the same. Scarcity meaning there's not very many of them, and also once it's over, it's over. So it's like kind of an artifact after that. Yeah. And then the journey, so there are like 3 components, I thought, to that whole project that made it compelling and interesting, and the whole thing sold out too. I think it was a brilliant thing. Obviously, she already had a big audience,
Right.
but who knows? Maybe she grew the audience during that time as well, just because of the style of the project.
I'm sure she did. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I love this kind of discussion because typically the typical path, especially for a pianist like yourself, like wouldn't the typical path be, I hope I get discovered if I win a competition and then
Hmm.
immediately get snatched up by some kind of management company, and then they're going to create a tour for you, and now you have to play, these three pieces, or the one that you played at the competition, you have to play that 30 more times around the world or whatever.
Right. Yes, that was the. I didn't really know exactly. I just thought, well, this seems like the path that I'm supposed to be going on,
Yeah.
and so I guess I'll do it. And yeah, the going to a fancy school and winning competitions. Although many pianists don't. The thing is, that's what that's the obvious path, because that's what my teachers or my teacher in college would say. Well, you should get a master's degree, um, and then there are all these competitions that are there to separate pianists from each other. But then there are all these pianists like Lang Lang won competitions, but he didn't go to my knowledge, he didn't go to a conservatory. For at least he started when he was rather young, um, and some and he's not the only one of the pianists who didn't who they may have just happened into an opportunity, but so so it's not like the prescribed path is necessarily the right path
Right.
for everyone. And so and I've realized that more since I've not gone on it. But as a if you're an artist, and even with those pianists who are the more traditionally classical, like Lang Lang and Yu Wang
Mhm.
and Kissin and so forth, um, they're all trying to differentiate from each other anyway. And so as a performing artist, you if at some point, whether it be from the beginning or after you've already garnered these accolades, you have to realize and be able to communicate why people want you and not somebody else. And the reason that they would want you is because of certain skills, certain attributes, characteristics that you have that nobody else does. And in my opinion, the earlier you can realize that and and bring that to bear in your decision making and what music you learn and how you learn it and how you develop it, maybe you compose it yourself, the better.
100%. Yeah, especially the composing piece, or the just the creativity piece. If you're That's one really big way you can set yourself apart in our space, because not a lot of people do that. Not a lot of
No,
people do that at all.
no.
So yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, because I know the last time we talked, we were talking about how you were creating a couple of things, how you've created a lot of works, a lot of music, albums, and you're supported. Like, you have
Yes.
supporters. And so a lot of people, when you're talking about this kind of career path, the money piece is a complete mystery. And so I'd love to talk about, if there's people listening who are like, you know what, I'm a creator. I would love to have something like what Barron is doing, where you're doing your own albums, you're creating a completely, entirely new genre. How are you supported in your artistic endeavors?
So I am supported to create new albums. The last I've made 3 solo albums. The last 2 I have crowdfunded, and I've raised at this point over $100,000 for those 2 albums put together. And I've done that. I part of it was that I was born into a good name, especially in where I live. My father's been playing around Tulsa for decades,
Okay.
and so I grew up and people saw me, and then people started seeing me perform, and so I already had somewhat of a reputation, so that helped a lot. But then I also had to develop it myself. I didn't
Mhm.
start raising money until 2016, and I graduated from college in 2009, so I had 7 years over which I was working as a musician. I was doing society gigs, I was teaching, I was accompanying,
Mhm.
um, but I was also pursuing the adventure as well, the unknown. And when I launched a fundraising campaign in 2016 to fund my second album, The Master's Apprentice, I I was met with a lot of enthusiasm from people who wanted to see me do well, because they knew that it wasn't, time and talent weren't enough to get um, to success, so to speak, as an artist, to get to self sustainability. Money is also important. So um, and so I thought it was going to be just a Kickstarter, but then as I talked to people and got feedback, one of the best pieces of advice I've received is, if you want uh, advice, ask for money, and if you want money, ask for advice. And so I would go to people and say, this is what I'm thinking about doing, what do you think of this idea? And then they would offer money, or they would offer a connection, or what have you. And one thing that I realized was that Kickstarter is good, but more people who are able to contribute at a higher level don't want to go through Kickstarter because they don't know how it works, or they don't want 10% to be taken away from their contribution, which is about what happens when Kickstarter and credit card companies take their cut. You get 90% of what was pledged instead of 100. And so I realized, oh, I should do a private. I should just go outside of Kickstarter for most of the funds, and then do Kickstarter for the people who don't know about me yet, for the people who need that sense of urgency that Kickstarter provides, or for people who just feel it's easier to give me $20 through Kickstarter than it is to write me a check or send me a Venmo. Although maybe Venmo wasn't really, I didn't really use it much in 2016. Kickstarter works for some things. And then I took that knowledge and transferred it to this past album as well. I think that I'm coming to the end of my ability to raise funds in that way, because at a certain point, people start to think, okay, well, how is this different? Why do you need this money in the same way? I could do pre-orders, and that be the fundraising for an album, but the big goal, I'm going to do this big thing and raise money for an album in the same way that I've done the past two. I think there's a limit to that, and so that I'm actually shifting how I'm anticipating funding my next album. And then eventually, I don't think that I'll need to for forever. I wouldn't. I could use concert earnings or other revenue to fund it, but I may want to if uh, if the circumstances are right. If there's still a demand to help me fund albums in that way,
And do you say, when you raise the money, do you say like, this goes for the mixing of it, this, I need this amount for promotion, I need this amount for pizza and Chipotle, I need this amount for like, how does it work?
Yes, I break down and give an estimate of how much time, for part of it is paying me, because it takes a lot of time for me to work, and I do a lot of the promotional and marketing work myself. I've learned how to make videos and that sort of thing. So yes, I break down all the different components, and some people read that and some people don't, but for the people who do want it, then it's there.
Right. Yeah, because I always kind of wondered that, like, because you do have to have money to live while you're creating this thing too. So as part of it, getting paid to do the work.
Yes, but you can say, this is what it would take for somebody else to do it. This is what it would cost for somebody else to do it. And so I'm doing this work. It's not like you're just sitting there and wanting to get paid for it. You're actually working on a particular part of the project. And so yes, I think it's easily justifiable to say, I'm going to have to do this work, or this work will have to be done. Either I pay somebody else to do it, or I do it myself for less money, because I know this project better than somebody else would, and I could communicate it more easily.
Right.
So, but yes, that's certainly an integral part of your budget.
Awesome. So fascinating. So, and over time, you've built up an audience of people who have supported you.
Yes.
And thus they become part of the people who are on the group of people who are on the journey with you.
Yes.
Yes. And have you built some of your audience through social media, or is it mostly personal contacts, or a combination of both?
Combination of both. I think that there are. I think the stronger of those of the audience, the more committed members are the ones that come through personal contact through in-person concerts.
Hmm.
But there are exceptions to that too. There's one gentleman who lives in California who saw one of my YouTube videos and has had me out to perform there and has been a very strong supporter. So there are exceptions to that rule, but I think the in-person connection is the most valuable
Right. That's awesome.
in all ways.
Yeah, that's cool. So tell me a little bit about, I mean, you've told me that people can access your music if they want to play it and they don't have to pay
Yes.
for it.
Yes.
So why is
So
that?
I've published in the public domain,
Okay.
and I've done that primarily because I view my art as a gift to the world, to any of the world who wants to receive it. And and I think that so if nobody has to ask permission to use it, then it will be received by more and more people. And I think that's good for me because it is free advertising. I think of the story of It's a Wonderful Life, which whose copyright lapsed after 30 years and only then became extremely popular. Before that, it had lost money. And so I think this is an investment in my future value. With more people who learn about me, then I will be. I can demand a higher fee for future performances and compositions, and so it's an investment in myself to do that. I also know what it's like to be a young artist, and especially about 10 years ago when I was starting out, the copyright rules on Facebook and YouTube were unclear how that would be sorted, whether you'd get a copyright strike, and so I was afraid to use anybody else's music in my own videos. And so I want to help other artists, assuming that my music ever gets to the point that people would recognize it, but you have to plan for success.
Yeah.
So, assuming that happens, then I want to help other artists start out by giving them music they can play. And then lastly, there's a part of I don't I it's easier to go with the current rather than it is to fight it, because with the proliferation, I know non-fungible tokens are now a way that you can have
Hmm.
more control. But before I knew about that, or I'm not even sure if I would use it. But the current of consumer demand is just to use music and get it for free or almost free. Spotify, Apple Music, and on YouTube, that
Yeah.
I'm getting paid very little for that. And instead of saying, and if somebody wanted to get it for free, if somebody then they could find out how to do it eventually. If my music got popular enough,
Hmm.
they could find a bootleg copy of the sheet music. And
Right.
so my thought is, let me just go with this current rather than trying to fight it. And then that will hopefully engender a lot more support and goodwill from my audience, and they'll be more willing to do things that would help me. So I think for all those reasons, and I've been proven right on those already, even within the last 2 months, which is how long my music has been out at this point. I guess when this interview airs, it'll be about 3 months. But I've been proven correct on all those points, and so I have no regrets in publishing in the public domain. And I plan to continue publishing all the recordings and compositions that I can, assuming that I'm not recording copyrighted music. I plan to publish all of that in the public domain.
That's awesome. I love that. And you mentioned NFTs. Have you
Yes.
thought of creating something in that way so that you're kind of moving into the future in that way? Because I know it's kind of a current conversation right now.
Yeah, I've barely thought about it. And maybe at some point I'm sure I will try it, but part of my thought is, if I don't know exactly how it works, then how is my audience who skews older, how are they
Mhm.
going to know how those work?
Right.
Um, and my interest is in getting my art to people's ears and eyes,
Hmm.
and so maybe at some point, but right now I think I just want people to hear this,
Yeah.
and then maybe once enough demand is created for a future product that I haven't made yet, then maybe I would look into an NFT. But if I have to look it up and figure out how it works, how much more are the people who already are interested in what I'm doing? How much more are they going to have to work to figure it out?
Right. Yeah, I get that. Well, it's interesting because it's kind of the ground floor with that, and I'm just curious to
Uh-huh.
see
Yeah.
who will jump on board when, because, I'm just getting interested in cryptocurrency now. And what held me back a decade ago is that I didn't understand how it works.
Mm-hmm.
But what I know now is you don't really have to know how it works. You know
Fair
what I mean?
enough.
Like yeah, because it's so interesting how I was like, well, what is the blockchain? I need to understand what it is. But what if I just would have said, I don't care how it works. I'm just gonna buy a couple of these for $300.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would have so much money right now. You know what I mean? So it's just funny how technology can stop us, and sometimes maybe it doesn't matter if if it doesn't serve a purpose right now, but that planning for the future might be something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So
So I don't know, and
yeah.
honestly, I don't know how it works with an album. I know I've heard how it works with visual art, but I still can't understand it. Like when you buy it, like how do you look at it? And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really know, but it's a very interesting conversation, which I don't know a whole lot about, but
Mm-hmm.
it's curious. So tell
Yeah.
me about you're having an album come out really soon, right?
I just had an album come out. We
Okay.
so I'm now working on two other projects, but yeah,
Can
I
you give us
just
a
had
hint
an
what they
album.
are, or are they still secret?
I can talk about one of them secret, but the other one I can talk about. So I was telling you about how, and this is actually the newer one. I was telling you about how my model for fundraising was probably going to change. And this is the idea. So this is the example of that. And this is the idea that Ben, my marketing advisor, came to me with, which is to create an album of collaborative music. Essentially, since this is a classical audience, they'll understand this, that these are basically structured commissions. I have a set of parameters. In this case, it's going to be for solo piano, and the pieces will be no longer than, let's say, 6 or 7 minutes. Uh, but I will offer uh, commissions to compose a piece for specific patrons, and and it's really to tell whatever story that they want to tell with this piece. And the project is called Storylines. So I will be
Cool.
and this is a call for anybody out there who's interested, who would like to collaborate. And this is for musicians and non-musicians alike. I actually used to do this when I was in my hip hop, when I did my hip hop music. I started making birthday songs for my friends. I would write a song about my a family member, and then I would perform it and record it. And then I started getting hired to do that every now and then. So this is a form of that. Um, it's interesting how skills that I've learned always come back, and I use them
Yeah.
again, even if they seemed really inane and unrelated. And so that's what I'm just at the very beginning of this project, and my so that's what I'm working on now, which is, and that shifts. Those pieces will all be commissioned, and they'll have a set uh, price, but I'll also have some. I could have an application process where people send in the stories that they would want to tell, and then that's the project that I would kickstart. So I could still
Mm,
include a Kickstarter campaign. There's a possibility of me targeting somebody who is famous and say, I want to write this person's story. Can I find the funding to get me to write this person's story? So I'm really excited about it, it's much less control than I have ever had in a solo project, which is thrilling to me because I like having the control, but it's good to bring in other input. So that's what the Storylines project is, the most recent, and we're at the very beginning phases of it. So it won't see the light of day until next year at earliest.
so will people, if say someone's listening and they're a composer or they're some kind of artist and they're like, I wanna collaborate,
Mm-hmm.
that this is the kind of thing that they can reach out to you and
They could, yeah.
okay, cool.
Absolutely. But also so any level of musical expertise is open. It's not like, yeah, it's more so the story that I'm seeking to tell. And if you have musical vocabulary that you would like to be included, then we can work on that. And if you just think, I don't know how you would put this together musically, I just want to commemorate my parents' wedding anniversary or something like that, then it's anybody could, this is open to anybody.
That's very cool. I love that so much. And that's still in the works. But
Right.
tell us about what's already released.
Right. So I just released an album called First of Its Kind, and that came about because I was looking for other music that was classical in orientation, but used a different language, a different vernacular than the classical music that I grew up with. And even that classical music has, obviously there's the differences between Chopin and Liszt and Rachmaninoff and Bach
Right.
and so forth. But um, I had chosen, after I won that competition that sent me to Israel, that's where the tour took place. I had chosen Classical with Attitude. That's the title of the program that I curated or that I put together. It was classical music that has jazz or ragtime influence. So George Gershwin's the obvious choice, Nikolai Kapustin, and William Bolcom. And then after that album, I did an album of jazz transcriptions by Oscar Peterson, Art Tatum, Errol Garner, my favorite jazz pianists, and I actually made the transcriptions myself. And so that was another way of performing classical-ish music because it was already written out, even though somebody else had improvised it. And then I thought, well, the next logical step beyond classical and beyond jazz and ragtime influenced classical music is other American influenced classical music, soul, funk, blues, country. And when I went to look for that music, I couldn't find it, which is not to say that it doesn't exist, but I wasn't able to determine that it existed. And so I thought, well, if nobody has written this yet, then I might as well do it. And so I wrote a sonata, and I wrote that because I needed a lot of music to perform for my hometown audience who had already heard everything else that I had to play. And then I accompanied that with a dance suite inspired by Bach, and because he wrote dance suites, and so have many other composers, dance suites of their time, taking Alamand, Courant, whatever, jigs. And so I took a pop tune that was the Whitney Houston and the Goofy Movie song. I took I wrote something in the style of 1950s soul, like Sam Cooke. I wrote a country waltz, and then I wrote a Trinidadian, a calypso, which that's where my dad is from. And so those are the four influences in the dance suite. And then the sonata includes funk, it includes pop, and then and but more, the form of it is in a sonata, so it's longer in scope, it's larger in scope. um and it was really, I had not really composed before. I had done some arranging, some cover songs, as people like to call them, of Jackson 5, but I was taking that skill of playing pop on the piano and actually just writing the tunes myself. And so that's where First of Its Kind came from. And that is available on all of your favorite streaming platforms, and you can get it for free, both the audio and the sheet music, on my website. So
That's so cool. Okay, I'm gonna link up all that stuff in the show notes, as well as, some your website and how to get in touch with you if people are like, oh my gosh, I really want to collaborate on your next project.
yes.
And anything else that seems, because I know we mentioned a couple of other cool things. So I'll link those up in the show notes. And I'm so excited for you, Barron. I think your career is really awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
Well,
yeah, so thanks for coming on the show. And yeah, it was a
well,
pleasure.
it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on, and thanks for helping tell the stories of unorthodox artists' adventures.
Of course.